My name is Beatrice, and I'm 58 years old. I never imagined my own daughter-in-law would try to harm me using something as ordinary as my prescription. When you spend your whole life caring for people as a nurse, you never think you'll one day become the patient, let alone the target. I retired 5 years ago, after nearly 3 decades in healthcare, and settled into a quiet life with my son Aaron. My husband passed away years earlier, and Aaron was my only child, my pride and joy. When he told me he'd met someone and planned to marry, I was genuinely happy for him. I thought maybe, finally, I could have a family again, a daughter I never had. Her name was Felicity, young, beautiful, charming in that practice sort of way. She worked in marketing, always busy, always talking about new opportunities. When she moved into our family home after the wedding, I made every effort to welcome her. I wanted her to feel like part of the family, not a guest. But almost immediately, I noticed something odd about her. She didn't like to help me much. If I asked her to grab something from the kitchen, she'd sigh. When I mentioned needing to refill my prescriptions, she'd suddenly turn cheerful and say, "Oh, let me handle that for you." That shift caught my attention, the way she went from cold to helpful when it came to my medications. I take daily pills for blood pressure and arthritis, nothing unusual. They're part of my routine. I keep them in a small wooden box by the kitchen window, organized neatly in labeled bottles. Every nurse learns to be meticulous about medication. It's second nature to me. So, when Felicity began offering to help organize my pills, I noticed every detail. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and found her standing near the cabinet where I kept my medication. She jumped when she saw me. "Oh, I was just tidying up in here," she said quickly, flashing an unconvincing smile. Her tone was light, but her eyes gave her away. She looked guilty, caught in the act of something she couldn't explain. I didn't confront her, not yet. I told myself maybe I was overthinking, maybe she was just trying to help. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was that same gut instinct I used to get as a nurse when something looked off about a patient's chart or a coworker's behavior. The following week, Felicity picked up my prescription from the pharmacy again. She returned home, dropped the white paper bag on the counter, and said cheerfully, "All set. You're stocked for another month." "Thank you, dear," I replied, forcing a smile. Later that evening, as I filled my pill box for the week, something didn't sit right. I picked up one of the pills and held it under the light. They looked different. Same shape, same label on the bottle, but the color was slightly off, duller, almost chalky looking compared to my usual batch. I reached for last month's bottle, which still had a few tablets left. When I placed one next to the new pill, the difference was undeniable. One was bright pink, the other a faded, almost white shade. I frowned, double-checking the label. Same dosage, same brand. Everything appeared normal, except it wasn't. The next morning, I mentioned it casually to Felicity over breakfast. "These new pills look different. Did they change suppliers or something?" I asked. Without even glancing up from her phone, she said, "Oh, probably. Pharmacies switch brands all the time. It's nothing to worry about." Her tone was dismissive, rehearsed even. I nodded but didn't respond. That day, I took my pills as usual. Within an hour, I started feeling dizzy. My hands trembled slightly, and my vision blurred for a moment. I brushed it off at first, maybe I hadn't eaten enough breakfast. But the next day, the same thing happened. My head felt heavy, my heart racing. I checked my blood pressure with my home monitor. It was significantly higher than normal. That terrified me. When Aaron came home from work, I told him about it. He frowned and said, "Mom, you've always been sensitive about your meds. Maybe it's just stress. Felicity wouldn't mess with your prescriptions." I wanted to believe him, but something in his voice sounded more defensive than reassuring. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What if it wasn't stress? What if Felicity really had done something to those pills? But why? What could she possibly gain from it? I decided not to take any more until I knew for sure. The next morning, I made a plan. I would go to the pharmacy myself. I'd ask the pharmacist about the difference. I didn't tell Aaron or Felicity. I just quietly slipped out after breakfast, clutching the suspicious bottle in my purse. When I arrived at the pharmacy, I asked to speak with the pharmacist. His name tag read, David. He greeted me politely, asking how he could help. I explained everything: how my daughter-in-law had picked up my last refill, how the pills looked different, and how I'd been feeling unwell since taking them. David took the bottle, examined the label, and frowned. He tilted it under the light, turning it carefully in his hands. Then he looked up at me and said something that made my heart sink. "Ma'am, these pills are not what we dispensed." The pills looked off, same label, different color. David's words hung in the air like an alarm bell I couldn't unhear. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. He explained gently. "These tablets aren't the same brand or dosage we issued last time. The label's accurate, but the medication inside isn't. Someone must have tampered with it after it left our hands." My heart pounded. Tampered. That word alone made my stomach twist. I took a shaky breath. "Could there be a mix-up at the pharmacy?" I asked hopefully. He shook his head, firmly. "No, ma'am. We log every batch number, and this isn't even the same manufacturer." I gripped the counter, trying to steady myself. The image of Felicity smiling as she handed me the bag replayed in my mind. That fake, cheerful expression. The way she'd brushed off my concern. David leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Please stop taking these immediately. Bring me any others you have at home, and I'll compare them." I nodded numbly and promised I would. As I left the pharmacy, the world outside seemed sharper, harsher. The sun was too bright, the air too thin. I couldn't believe this was happening inside my own home, with my own family. When I returned, Felicity was in the kitchen scrolling through her phone, humming softly. She looked up and smiled. "Oh, you went out. Did you get your prescriptions sorted?" I hesitated before answering. "Yes, I just wanted to double-check something." She shrugged. "Good. I told you it's nothing to worry about." But there was something to worry about, something very wrong. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the pill bottle. I thought about all the little signs I'd ignored. The broken seal on the box last month, the bitter taste in my tea some mornings, the sudden eagerness she showed when handling my medications. I picked up my notebook and began jotting down everything I could remember. Dates, times, small observations, every odd moment that didn't sit right. My old training as a nurse kicked in. Document everything. Never assume. The next few days, I avoided taking any pills from that bottle. I told Felicity I'd been forgetting, just to see her reaction. Each time, she reminded me insistently. "Don't skip your meds, Beatrice. You know how important they are for your heart." The way she emphasized, important, made my skin crawl. I didn't tell Aaron yet. He adored his wife and was blind to her manipulations. He always said, "Mom, she just wants to help. You've been alone a long time. Let her take care of you." He didn't see the flicker in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. 3 days later, I went back to the pharmacy with the bottle. David examined it under a magnifying lamp and then turned the bottle around slowly, pointing to a faint line under the cap. "See this? That's not a manufacturer's seal. Someone pried this open and glued it shut again." My throat tightened. "So, you're saying I'm not saying who," he interrupted carefully. "But yes, someone definitely opened it. I can send this to our lab to identify what these pills actually are." He gave me a reassuring smile. "You did the right thing coming here. I'll call you as soon as we have the results." I thanked him and left, clutching my purse like a lifeline. The whole drive home, I rehearsed what I'd say if Felicity asked where I'd gone. When I walked in, she was waiting in the living room, sipping coffee, her eyes tracking me. "Out again?" she asked casually. "Just running errands," I replied, forcing a smile. That evening, I pretended to be tired and went to bed early. My mind wouldn't stop spinning. Why would she do this? Was it money? Jealousy? Or something darker? I remembered a few odd comments she'd made before, how she complained that my house felt too much like your mom's place, and how she once asked Aaron, half-jokingly, what would happen when it's all ours someday. My chest ached as realization set in. I wasn't just being paranoid. There was motive. She had reason. The next morning, my phone rang. It was David. "Mrs. Lane, we tested the pills. They're not your prescribed medication. They're actually a diuretic, a kind that can raise blood pressure significantly in patients like you." I nearly dropped the phone. "So that's why I've been feeling worse." "Yes. Someone swapped them intentionally, and that's dangerous. You could have had a serious medical emergency." I thanked him again, my voice breaking. "What should I do?" "Let me handle the investigation quietly," he said. "Don't confront anyone yet. Just act normal. I'll prepare something to help us find out who's behind this." I hung up, my hands trembling. Act normal. Pretend. I could do that. I'd done it for years as a nurse. Smiling through stress and holding composure during chaos. That night at dinner, I sat across from Felicity. She laughed at something Aaron said. Her laughter, light and easy. She looked perfectly innocent. But all I could see was danger. Every word she spoke felt rehearsed. Every gesture calculated. I stared at her hands as she reached for her glass of wine, steady and unbothered. Those same hands had likely opened my bottle, replaced my medicine, and smiled about it. And as I looked at her, one chilling thought settled deep in my mind: this wasn't over. The pharmacist knew something was wrong, and now I had to find out just how far my daughter-in-law was willing to go. "Ma'am, these pills are not what we dispensed." Those words kept replaying in my mind for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard David's calm yet firm tone echoing in my head. I couldn't focus on anything else, not the garden, not my books, not even the evening shows I used to love watching. All I could think about was the bottle of pills sitting on David's counter, evidence of something dark I wasn't ready to admit out loud. 3 days after our last conversation, my phone rang again. I recognized the pharmacy's number immediately. My pulse quickened. "Mrs. Lane?" David's voice came through the receiver. "We've confirmed everything. I need you to come in." My heart sank. "Is it bad? Let's talk in person," he said gently. When I arrived at the pharmacy, he led me to a small consultation room in the back. He closed the door behind us, counter, and sighed. "We ran the analysis. The medication inside is entirely different from your prescription. This isn't a manufacturing error, it's deliberate substitution." I swallowed hard. "So someone replaced them?" "Yes," he said quietly. "The seal was broken and resealed with adhesive. Whoever did this knew how to make it look untouched." I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. "What medication was it?" He looked at his notes. "It's a diuretic meant for water retention, but it can dangerously affect blood pressure if taken in your condition. Frankly, it could have caused a stroke." My stomach flipped. I stared down at the pills, those innocent-looking little tablets that had nearly poisoned me. "And you're certain they didn't come from here?" He nodded firmly. "Positive. The pills we dispense come sealed directly from the supplier. There's no way this happened on our end. Whoever handled them after pickup is responsible." My throat went dry. "My daughter-in-law, she's the one who picked them up." David's expression softened. "I figured that might be the case when you mentioned her earlier." He paused, studying me for a moment. "Mrs. Lane, I don't want to alarm you, but this is serious. You need to stop letting anyone else handle your medications." "I understand," I whispered. "I'll be careful." He hesitated before adding, "If you'd like, I can notify the authorities right away. But before we do that, it might be useful to have proof, undeniable proof." The word proof struck something inside me. As a nurse, I'd learned the importance of documentation. Without it, no one believes your story. I thought of Aaron, of how he'd defended Felicity so quickly the last time I voiced my concerns. Without evidence, he'd never believe she'd done something like this. I nodded slowly. "What do you suggest?" David leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Let's handle this carefully. I'll prepare your next refill myself. I can mark the packaging discreetly and keep a record of every seal and label. If the pills are swapped again, we'll know exactly when and by whom." It was a clever idea. Cautious. Controlled. And more importantly, It gave me a plan. I thanked him, shaking his hand firmly. "You're the first person who's actually listened to me," I said, my voice cracking. He smiled kindly. Sometimes intuition is worth listening to, especially a nurse's. That night, I returned home, trying to keep my face calm. Felicity was in the living room, watching TV, her legs tucked under a blanket. She looked up and smiled sweetly. "Out again, Beatrice? You've been quite the busy bee lately." I forced a laugh. "Just picking up a few things." She tilted her head, studying me with that too-perfect smile. "You know, I can handle your prescriptions next time. You shouldn't have to go through all that trouble." I kept my tone light. "Oh no, I need the walk. Keeps me young." But inside, I was seething. The audacity of her offering again after what she'd done made my stomach churn. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every little interaction we'd had since she'd moved in. The way she watched me when I took my pills. How she'd linger in the kitchen when I filled my glass of water. How she'd insist I eat or drink something she'd prepared herself. I remembered one night a few weeks earlier, when I'd woken up thirsty and found her standing in the kitchen with the refrigerator door open. She jumped when she saw me, clutching a bottle of juice. "Oh, you scared me," she said, smiling nervously. "I could say the same," I'd replied. "Couldn't sleep," she'd muttered, quickly putting the bottle away. At the time, I'd brushed it off. But now, every odd moment made sense. The next morning, David called to confirm that my new prescription would be ready in a few days. "Remember," he said, "don't mention any of this. Let her think everything's normal." Normal. That was the hardest part, pretending. Smiling at the woman who had deliberately tampered with something that could have killed me. For the next couple of days, I played the role of the grateful mother-in-law. I complimented her cooking, thanked her for running errands, even offered to teach her a family recipe. I made sure she felt comfortable, too comfortable. And when the time came to refill my medication again, I casually mentioned it at breakfast. "Oh," the pharmacy called. "My prescription's ready," I said. Felicity's eyes lit up instantly. "Oh, I can go get it for you, if you want." That fake enthusiasm again. I smiled. "That's very kind of you. Thank you, dear." She grabbed her purse without hesitation and left, humming as she closed the door behind her. As I watched her car pull out of the driveway, I felt both dread and anticipation twisting in my chest. Because this time, things were different. This time, we were ready. I didn't know what she planned to do with that bottle, but I was finally going to find out. Once I started looking closer, I noticed other strange things happening around the house. The mind plays tricks when fear sets in, but what terrified me more was realizing my mind wasn't playing tricks at all. Ever since that conversation with David, I began noticing details I'd overlooked before. Tiny inconsistencies that painted a much darker picture when I connected them together. It began with my morning tea. I always prepared it myself. 2 bags of chamomile, a teaspoon of honey, and a dash of lemon. But one morning, Felicity insisted on making it for me. She smiled sweetly as she handed me the mug. "You sit down, Beatrice. Let me take care of you for a change." The first sip burned slightly, and there was a faint bitterness under the sweetness. "New tea brand?" I asked, forcing a polite smile. She froze for just a moment before saying, "Oh yeah, they must have changed the formula." It was subtle, but I caught it, the hesitation. The split second of panic before her easy tone returned. I drank only half the cup that day, dumping the rest down the sink when she wasn't looking. Later, when I returned to wash the mug, I noticed faint residue clinging to the sides, a cloudy ring that wasn't typical for herbal tea. I rinsed it out, pretending nothing was wrong. But inside, my heart was pounding. It wasn't just the tea. The fridge had become another battlefield of suspicion. Containers I'd labeled and sealed were sometimes moved to different shelves. My leftovers were lighter, as though someone had scooped out portions and replaced them with something else. It could have been coincidence, but at this point, coincidence was a luxury I couldn't afford to believe in. One night, I caught her opening my medication cabinet again. I had crept out of my room for a glass of water and found her standing there, the cabinet door half open, my pill bottles lined up neatly on the counter. She turned quickly when she heard me, clutching one bottle in her hand. "Oh, I was just organizing your meds for tomorrow," she said with a nervous laugh. "That's thoughtful," I replied softly, masking the rising anger in my chest. "But I prefer to do that myself. Old habits." Her smile faltered. "Oh, of course, just trying to help." The way she placed the bottle down gently, as if afraid I'd see something, made me realize she wasn't clumsy or careless. She was calculated. After that, I began locking my bedroom door at night. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd do in my own home. But the moment I heard her footsteps late at night, quiet, slow, moving past my door, I knew I wasn't being paranoid. I also started keeping a small spiral notebook hidden under my mattress. Every night before bed, I'd jot down everything that seemed unusual. The time she left the house, the meals she cooked, the tone in her voice, the looks she gave Aaron when she thought I wasn't watching. I even noted the way Aaron's attitude started changing toward me. He became distant, sometimes defensive when I mentioned Felicity. "Mom, please," he'd sigh. "You're making her uncomfortable. She's just trying to help." I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him see what I saw, but I knew he wouldn't. Not without proof. That proof came sooner than I expected. David called me one afternoon. His voice was serious, measured. "Mrs. Lane, the lab results are back from the pills we tested earlier. I thought you should hear this in person." I drove straight to the pharmacy. When I arrived, he led me to the same small consultation room. He laid a printed report on the table and pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. The pills were substituted with hydrochlorothiazide, a diuretic that can dangerously elevate blood pressure for someone in your condition. My pulse quickened. "So I wasn't imagining the dizziness, the nausea, none of it?" He shook his head. "No, you weren't. Whoever did this knew enough to make it look harmless, but this could have been deadly over time." I sank into the chair, my eyes stinging. "She wanted me sick," I whispered. "She wanted me weak." David's eyes softened. "I can't say why she did it, but this wasn't an accident. I think it's time we take the next step." I looked up at him, confused. "Next step?" He nodded. "We need to set a plan. We'll create an environment where she believes she can get away with it again. And when she tries, we'll catch her in the act." My breath caught in my throat. "You mean trap her?" "In a sense, yes," he said. "We'll keep you safe, and we'll have concrete evidence. But we have to do it carefully, or she'll realize you're onto her." The thought of it both terrified and relieved me. Finally, there would be clarity. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, I saw her silhouette through the kitchen window, humming softly as she set the table for dinner. From a distance, she looked like the perfect daughter-in-law, tidy, smiling, graceful. But behind that polished exterior was someone I didn't recognize anymore. At dinner, she placed a bowl of soup in front of me. "You'll love this, Beatrice. It's my grandmother's recipe." I smiled faintly, pretending to take a sip while my stomach churned. "It smells lovely," I said. She grinned, watching me a little too closely. I waited until she looked away, then quietly set the spoon down. That night, I checked the locks on my door twice, sliding the notebook from under my mattress and scribbling furiously by flashlight. David confirmed pills were replaced. Not pharmacy's error. Felicity tampered intentionally, preparing next step. I closed the notebook, my hand shaking. And as I turned off the light, one thought burned in my mind. I wasn't just dealing with a careless daughter-in-law anymore. I was living with someone who wanted me gone. "We can catch whoever's doing this, but we have to be smart," David said. The next morning, I sat across from David in the pharmacy's consultation room once again. I hadn't slept properly in days. Every sound in the house made me flinch. Every smile from Felicity felt like a performance. My instincts screamed that time was running out. David leaned forward, hands clasped. "I've handled similar cases before, Mrs. Lane. We can't accuse anyone until we have indisputable proof, but we can create a situation that exposes the truth." I listened closely as he outlined his plan. It was simple, but clever enough to work. He would prepare 2 identical bottles of my prescription, one genuine and one decoy. The real bottle would stay safely at the pharmacy, while the decoy would be the one Felicity picked up. Inside, instead of my medication, there would be harmless placebos. He'd use a tamper-evident seal that would clearly show if anyone tried to open it. If the seal's broken, we'll know someone tampered with it after pickup, he explained. And since we'll document every step, it'll hold up if we need to involve the police. I nodded slowly, my stomach tightening. And what do I do? You play along, he said gently. Let her think you trust her again. Make it easy for her to fall into the same pattern. The idea of pretending of sitting across from Felicity, smiling while knowing what she'd done made my skin crawl. But I'd spent a lifetime keeping calm under pressure in hospitals. I could do it again, just this once, for the truth. Before I left, David reassured me. I'll keep the real medication safe. Once this is over, you'll have what you need. That night, I tried to act normal. I cooked dinner, laughed at Aaron's stories, and even complimented Felicity's new haircut. She seemed surprised by my sudden warmth, her suspicion melting into smug satisfaction. See, we're getting along better already, she said with a laugh. Yes, I replied, keeping my tone steady. It's nice, isn't it? Inside, I was counting down the hours until the refill was due. When the day finally arrived, I casually mentioned over breakfast. The pharmacy called earlier. My prescription's ready for pickup. Felicity perked up immediately. Oh, I can grab it after my gym session. Save you the trip. Are you sure? I asked, pretending hesitation. Of course. It's no trouble. I smiled. Thank you, dear. You're very thoughtful. As soon as she left, I called David to let him know she was on her way. He confirmed he'd placed the decoy bottle under my name and made note of the pickup time in the system. The hours dragged by. I tried to distract myself with laundry and light cleaning, but I kept glancing out the window, waiting for her car to pull back into the driveway. When she finally returned, it was just past 4 in the afternoon. She walked in humming, carrying a small paper pharmacy bag. Got your meds, she said brightly, setting it on the kitchen counter. Thank you, I replied, my voice steady. You always take such good care of me. She smiled sweetly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Of course, Beatrice. You know I only want what's best for you. I nodded, forcing myself to hold her gaze. I know. I waited until she went upstairs before I approached the counter. The bag was untouched, still folded neatly at the top. I took a deep breath, picked it up carefully, and brought it to my room. Later that night, after Aaron and Felicity had gone to bed, I retrieved the bottle. My hands trembled as I turned it over under the lamp. The seal looked intact, but there was a faint, almost imperceptible tear near the edge, a tiny mark that wasn't supposed to be there. I took photos from every angle and texted them to David. Within minutes, he called. That seal's been tampered with, he said, his tone grim. Don't open it again, bring it back tomorrow morning. I swallowed hard. So she did it again. Yes. Now we just need one more confirmation before we involve law enforcement, he replied. The idea that Felicity had once again gone behind my back didn't just make me angry, it terrified me. She wasn't careless. She wasn't impulsive. She was deliberate. Methodical. This was someone who thought she could outsmart everyone around her. When I woke the next morning, I put the bottle in my purse and headed for the car quietly, but Felicity was already in the kitchen. Running errands early today? She asked, pouring herself coffee. Yes, I replied smoothly. Just want to beat the crowds. She smiled and nodded. Good idea. Be safe. As I walked out, I could feel her eyes on me. I didn't turn around. When I reached the pharmacy, David met me at the counter and ushered me inside. He examined the seal again under a magnifier, then looked up at me. No doubt about it. Someone's tampered with it. I felt my chest tighten. So, what now? He paused, considering his words. Now we move carefully. If we catch her in the act one more time, we can get undeniable proof video evidence. Video? I asked. He nodded. A hidden camera. That's the only way to show exactly what's happening. My heart raced. You mean, in my house? Yes, but it can be discreet, something small, like a clock camera. You can place it near your medication drawer. I nodded slowly, realizing this was the only way to end it once and for all. When I left the pharmacy that day, my fear had transformed into resolve. I wasn't the helpless victim Felicity thought I was. I'd been a nurse, a caretaker, a problem solver my entire life. And now, I was going to be the one to expose her. I didn't know it yet, but by the end of the week, the truth would be caught on camera and nothing would ever be the same again. The trap was set, and all I could do was wait. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a plan. It wasn't comfort, far from it, but there was a grim satisfaction in knowing I wasn't helpless anymore. David's voice echoed in my head as I prepared for what was coming next. Be calm, don't tip her off, just let her do what she's already been doing. That night, I went online and ordered a small hidden camera shaped like an alarm clock. It looked completely ordinary, but it had a clear view of my bedside table where I usually kept my medications. It arrived 2 days later. I set it up myself, checking the angle twice. The lens was almost invisible, perfectly disguised among the buttons. I tested the video, feed on my phone, making sure it worked. It did clear picture, good sound. Now all I had to do was wait for the right opportunity. At breakfast the next morning, I mentioned casually, "The pharmacy said I'll need another refill soon. They've been great about helping me lately." Felicity looked up from her phone, smiling. "Oh, I can grab it for you again when it's ready." I forced a laugh. "You really don't mind doing that?" "Not at all," she said, her tone almost too bright. "It's no trouble, Beatrice." Her eagerness sent a shiver down my spine. I'd given her the opening she wanted. The plan was in motion. That week, I kept to my routine morning walks, light gardening, cooking dinner as if nothing were amiss. I didn't want her to suspect that anything had changed. But under the surface, every smile was strained, every conversation carefully measured. I was walking on glass, afraid that even one wrong word might alert her. When the refill date came, I deliberately left the empty bottle on the kitchen counter. Right on cue, Felicity picked it up. "You're almost out, huh? I'll head over after lunch." I thanked her warmly, hiding my trembling hands under the table. Once she left, I immediately called David to confirm she was coming. "Got it," he said. "Everything's ready on my end. Remember, say nothing when she gets back." It was late afternoon when she returned. Her gym bag slung over one shoulder, and the white paper pharmacy bag in her hand. "Got it," she announced cheerfully, setting it down on the counter. "They said hi, by the way." I smiled faintly. "Oh, you're quite popular there now," she chuckled. "Guess I am." I thanked her, tucked the bag under my arm, and went to my room. As soon as I was alone, I placed the bottle on my nightstand, right under the camera's view. I turned the device on and double-checked that it was recording. Then I sat quietly, heart pounding. That night, I made a show of being tired early. "I think I'll turn in," I told Aaron and Felicity. "Sleep well, Beatrice," Felicity said, smiling sweetly from the couch. I went to my room, shut the door, and waited in the dark. My lamp was off, but the faint glow from the hallway seeped through the crack under the door. I could hear their voices drifting from the living room, Aaron laughing softly, Felicity talking about some TV show. An hour passed. Then another. The house grew quiet. I lay in bed, pretending to sleep. Around midnight, I heard the soft creak of a floorboard outside my door. My heart thudded against my ribs. The sound was followed by a slow, careful turn of the doorknob. The door eased open an inch, then another. Through my barely open eyes, I saw her silhouette. Felicity. She moved like a shadow, gliding toward the nightstand. My breath caught as I watched her pick up the bottle, turn it in her hands, and unscrew the cap. She reached into her robe pocket and pulled out a small plastic bag. My stomach twisted when I saw the contents: pills, slightly different in color, the same kind she'd swapped before. She replaced several from my bottle, resealed the cap, and then gently set it back down. Her movements were smooth, practiced. When she was done, she glanced around. her gaze brushing over the clock on the nightstand but not long enough to notice the tiny lens staring back at her. Then she slipped out as quietly as she came. I didn't move for several minutes after she left. My entire body was trembling, every muscle locked in place. When I finally reached for my phone, my fingers were shaking so hard that I nearly dropped it. I opened the camera app and saw the red recording light still flashing. It had worked. Every second of her sneaky, deliberate actions was captured in perfect clarity. The next morning, I acted normal. I made breakfast, greeted Aaron with a smile, and even thanked Felicity again for picking up my prescription. She was radiant, humming as she buttered toast, unaware that her mask was about to shatter. After they left for the day, I sat on the edge of my bed and replayed the footage. There she was, my daughter-in-law, sneaking into my room like a thief in the night. Watching her tamper with my medication made my stomach twist in both horror and disbelief. I forwarded the video to David right away. He responded within minutes. "This is the proof we needed. Don't confront her yet. We'll handle this carefully." I closed my eyes and let out a shaky breath. Relief and rage mixed inside me, boiling under the surface. The quiet, polite mask I'd worn for weeks was starting to crack. She thought she'd gotten away with it again. She thought I was weak, oblivious, too trusting. But now, I had her exactly where I wanted her, and the evidence that could destroy every lie she'd ever told. If she's doing this intentionally, we'll have solid evidence soon. The morning after I caught Felicity on camera, I could barely keep my composure. Every time I looked at her, my blood simmered. There she was, smiling, laughing, pouring orange juice into glasses as if she hadn't crept into my room in the middle of the night to poison me. I forced myself to breathe slowly. David's text kept replaying in my mind. "Don't confront her yet. Wait." So I waited. Aaron joined us at the breakfast table, oblivious to the silent war happening between his wife and me. "You two seem quiet this morning," he said, glancing between us. Felicity smiled first. "Just sleepy," she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. I managed a weak smile. "Didn't sleep well," I murmured, stirring my tea. I wondered if she noticed the bitterness in my tone. Probably not. She was too comfortable, too certain she'd fooled me again. As soon as Aaron left for work, I grabbed my phone and called David. "I have the footage," I whispered. He lowered his voice on the other end. "Good. Bring it in when you can. I'll make copies and forward it to the proper authorities, but we'll keep it quiet for now." "Do you think she'll try again?" I asked. "I do," he said grimly. "And the more she does, the stronger your case becomes. If we get one more instance, it's irrefutable." One more instance. That meant keeping the act going a little longer, pretending I didn't know. Pretending I still trusted her. That afternoon, I baked cookies, chocolate chip, her favorite. I offered her some as she worked at the dining table. "You've been such a help lately, Felicity," I said softly. "I really appreciate it." Her eyes lit up. "Oh, thank you, Beatrice. I'm glad we're finally getting along." That word finally made me want to laugh and scream all at once, but I only smiled. "Me too." The next day, I met David at the pharmacy. I handed him a flash drive with the footage from the hidden camera. We sat together at the counter, and he watched the video in silence. When it ended, he leaned back, his expression tight. "Mrs. Lane," he said, "this isn't just tampering. This is attempted poisoning." The words hit me like a slap, even though I already knew them to be true. "So, what happens now?" "I'll send this to my supervisor and the local authorities, but we'll keep things discreet until they're ready to act. For now, just keep things normal." Normal. That word had lost all meaning in my life lately. Back home, Felicity was on the phone in the kitchen when I returned. Her tone was sharp, irritated. "No," I said, "the transfer goes through next week," she snapped. "I'm not waiting another month." I paused in the hallway, my stomach knotting. "A financial transfer?" I stepped quietly until I could hear her voice more clearly. "I told you, once the papers are finalized, everything will be in my name," she hissed. "He doesn't suspect a thing." I didn't need to hear more. My suspicions had just multiplied. This wasn't just about my medication, she was after control. Maybe even my estate. That night, I decided to take one more precaution. I adjusted the camera to a better angle slightly higher, with a clear view of both my nightstand and the small drawer underneath where I kept a few important papers. I wanted everything documented. 2 nights later, she took the bait again. I was asleep in bed when I heard the faint click of my door opening. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid she might hear it. Through the barely open slit of my eyes, I saw her enter the room again, this time more confident, less cautious. She went straight for the nightstand, but this time she also opened the drawer below. She rifled through my papers, bank statements, insurance forms, my will. My breath caught as she carefully took photos with her phone before placing everything back. Then she picked up the pill bottle again, twisted the cap off, and replaced more pills from another small pouch. Her movements were steady, practiced, even casual. When she left, I lay frozen in bed for nearly 10 minutes before daring to move. My body trembled uncontrollably. The fear, the anger, the disgust, they all hit at once. The next morning, I drove to the pharmacy, clutching my purse so tightly my hands ached. David took one look at me and knew. She came back, didn't she? Yes, I whispered, handing him the flash drive. And she went through my papers too. She's planning something bigger, David. I know it. He sighed heavily. This footage, combined with the earlier one, is more than enough. I'll call the detective we've been consulting. It's time. A strange calm washed over me. For the first time, I wasn't scared, I was focused, determined. When I returned home, Felicity was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. "Oh, hey," she said brightly. "Running errands again?" I nodded. "Just a few things. Needed some fresh air." She smiled. "Good idea. You seem calmer lately. Less stressed." I wanted to laugh. Calm? I was a storm, waiting for the right moment to break. Later that evening, I stood in the kitchen alone, looking out the window as the sun dipped below the trees. My reflection stared back at me, older, weary, but stronger than I'd felt in years. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was fighting back. And with every passing day, her lies were tightening around her own neck. I didn't know it then, but the next person to see the footage wouldn't just be David, it would be Aaron. And that moment would change everything. "Aaron, there's something you need to see," I told him, trembling. I'd spent weeks holding everything in, every suspicion, every discovery, every terrifying moment of doubt. But after watching Felicity sneak into my room for the second time and steal through my personal papers, I knew it was time. The secret had eaten at me long enough. That night, I asked Aaron to come by my room after dinner. My hands were clammy, my heart racing as I rehearsed the words over and over in my head. When he finally appeared in the doorway, smiling like always, I nearly broke down. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Everything okay?" I motioned for him to close the door. "Sit, please." He frowned, but obeyed. The warmth in his expression faded as he noticed how pale and shaky I looked. "Mom, what's wrong?" "You're scaring me." I swallowed hard. "Aaron, I need you to promise you'll keep an open mind. What I'm about to show you, it's going to be hard to believe." He frowned, clearly confused. "Okay." My fingers trembled as I handed him my phone. "I want you to watch something." He pressed play. The video began. Felicity, moving silently into my bedroom, opening the pill bottle, switching out the tablets with those she'd brought in her pocket. Her movements were deliberate, cautious, like a thief who'd done it before. Aaron's jaw slowly dropped. His face turned pale as he leaned closer to the screen. What is this?" he whispered. "That's your wife," I said quietly. "In my room, swapping my medication with something else." He blinked rapidly, shaking his head. No, that can't be. Maybe she was checking something for you." "I didn't ask her to touch my medicine, Aaron. I caught her doing this twice. I have both recordings." He stared at me in disbelief, then at the phone again. You can't be serious. I am, I said softly. The pharmacist confirmed she tampered with them. The pills she replaced them with could have killed me. Aaron's face contorted, his eyes filling with confusion, denial, and fear all at once. She wouldn't, she loves you, Mom. I almost laughed, though it came out bitter. She doesn't love anyone but herself, Aaron. She's been pretending, playing a role. You have no idea what she's been doing behind our backs. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. This doesn't make sense. Why would she do this? What would she gain? I hesitated. Control, I said finally. She's been going through my financial papers too. I think she was trying to make me sick enough that I'd be declared incompetent. That way, she'd get access to my accounts through you. Maybe even convince you I couldn't handle my affairs anymore. He stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression torn between disbelief and horror. You really think she'd— I don't think, Aaron, I said, my voice trembling. I know, and I have the evidence. He sat back down slowly, burying his face in his hands. God, I don't know what to say. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the air vent. Then, quietly, Aaron said, "Let me talk to her." I reached out and grabbed his wrist. No. Please, not yet. If you confront her now, she'll deny it. She'll twist your words, make you doubt yourself. She's clever, Aaron, manipulative. We need to do this carefully. He looked up at me, eyes glassy. She's my wife, Mom. And she almost killed me, I whispered. The words seemed to pierce through the last of his denial. He blinked several times, his face going pale. You're serious? I nodded. Deadly serious. He stood up abruptly and began pacing again. I can't believe this. I thought she was— I finished his sentence for him. Perfect, so did I. He turned away from me, running a hand over his face. I need to see her reaction myself. I need to hear her say it. I wanted to protest. To stop him. But part of me knew this confrontation had been inevitable. Aaron needed to see who she really was, in his own way. That evening, while I stayed in my room, I could hear their voices downstairs. Aaron's voice was calm at first, questioning. Then louder, angrier. Felicity's tone was high-pitched, defensive. What are you talking about? She snapped. That's insane! Don't lie to me, Felicity, Aaron shouted. She has video evidence twice. You were in her room switching her medication. That's not true. She's delusional. You know she's been paranoid lately. Her voice cracked, the rehearsed innocence faltering. The argument escalated. I could hear furniture being moved, the sound of glass breaking. Then silence. Minutes later, Aaron stormed upstairs and appeared at my door. His eyes were red, his jaw tight. She denied everything, he said hoarsely. Said you're framing her, that you've lost it. I nodded sadly. I expected as much. He clenched his fists. I can't believe I didn't see it sooner. All the little things, the control, the manipulation, it all makes sense now. I placed a hand on his arm. It's not your fault, son. She fooled both of us. That night, the house was tense and silent. Felicity locked herself in the guest room. Aaron didn't sleep at all. I could hear him pacing in the hallway. I stayed awake too, listening, waiting, my heart aching not just from fear, but from heartbreak. I'd protected my son his whole life. Now, he was seeing evil in the very person he'd chosen to share it with. The next morning, when I went downstairs, Felicity was gone. Her closet was empty. Her car was missing. A note sat on the counter. It read, I can't live in a house where I'm accused of things I didn't do. Goodbye. I held the note in trembling hands. The anger, the fear, the exhaustion, they all washed over me at once. Aaron walked in a few minutes later, his face pale. She's gone, he said quietly. Yes, I replied, staring down at the paper. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end because, when people like Felicity run, they're not escaping. They're plotting their next move. I thought it was over, but it was only the beginning. When Felicity left, the silence in the house was deafening. For a few days, it almost felt peaceful, no fake smiles, no soft footsteps creeping outside my door at night, no tension simmering beneath polite conversation. But beneath that quiet calm, I could sense something darker still brewing. Aaron was heartbroken but also furious. He spent hours pacing, replaying every moment of their marriage, every red flag he'd brushed aside. "I can't believe I let her near you," he said one night, his voice breaking. "I brought her into our home. I trusted her." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't blame yourself. Manipulators like Felicity are experts at finding good people to exploit. You loved her, that's not a weakness, Aaron. It's proof of your heart." He didn't respond, only nodded silently, staring into space. Meanwhile, David had already sent the evidence, both videos, the tampered pill bottles, and his official documentation to the authorities. He told me to expect contact from a detective soon, and sure enough, within a week, Detective Clara Whitman called. Her voice was calm and measured. "Mrs. Lane, I've reviewed the report your pharmacist submitted. We'd like to meet to discuss the next steps." We arranged to meet at the local precinct. Aaron insisted on coming with me. Detective Whitman greeted us in her small office filled with neatly stacked files and the faint aroma of coffee. "I've seen a lot in my career," she said, "but this case, it's chilling. Not because of how elaborate it was, but because it was done by someone so close to you." I nodded, swallowing hard. She didn't just want to hurt me, she wanted control over my health, my finances, my life. The detective flipped through her notes. "We've confirmed through the pharmacist's logs that the pills were swapped after pickup, and the lab verified the contents were dangerous for your condition. That, combined with the footage, gives us grounds for an arrest." Aaron leaned forward. "Do you know where she went?" The detective sighed. "We're working on that. She hasn't used her credit cards in several days, but we're tracing her phone and bank activity." A few days later, Detective Whitman called again. "We found something," she said. "Your daughter-in-law attempted to open an account in your name using falsified medical documents. It looks like she was planning to request power of attorney." My chest tightened. "Power of attorney?" I repeated. "Yes. If she could prove you were medically unfit to manage your affairs, she could take control of your assets legally." Aaron slammed his fist against the table. "She was going to drain my mother's accounts and make her look senile." "That's the pattern," the detective said. "We've seen similar cases, though not always this personal. It's financial exploitation disguised as caregiving." I sat in silence, absorbing every word. All those months of her pretending to be helpful, attentive, devoted, it had all been a facade. Every cup of tea, every offer to refill my prescriptions, every sweet smile was part of a calculated plan. Detective Whitman asked if I had noticed any other irregularities, bank letters, phone calls, missing mail. I told her about the times certain bills never arrived, and how Felicity insisted on handling my online banking because it was too confusing. That small detail seemed to confirm her suspicions. "She was laying groundwork," the detective explained. "She wanted to make sure when she acted, there'd be no paper trail pointing back to her." Over the next week, investigators followed her trail. It turned out she'd been in contact with a man in another town, a supposed financial advisor, who was actually her former partner in several fraudulent schemes. Together, they'd conned elderly clients, faked medical conditions, and stolen from families. Aaron was devastated when we heard that. "So she wasn't just lying to you," he muttered bitterly. "She was lying to me too, about everything." "Yes," I said softly. "But she can't hide forever." The following week, the police found her. She'd been staying in a motel 2 towns over, under a false name. When they arrested her, she still had some of my personal documents, bank statements, insurance records, and even copies of my signature. Detective Whitman called me the same evening. "Mrs. Lane," she said, "we have her in custody. We found enough evidence in her room to connect her directly to your case and several others. You did the right thing coming forward." When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The house felt heavier somehow, not from fear anymore, but from the weight of everything that had happened. Aaron walked in a few minutes later, his expression cautious. Was that the detective? Yes, I said quietly. They found her. He exhaled slowly and sank into a chair. I don't even know how to feel. Part of me is angry. Part of me's just sad. I married a monster and didn't even see it. I reached over and squeezed his hand. You saw what she wanted you to see, Aaron. People like her, they thrive on trust. But we saw through her in the end. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window with a blanket draped over my shoulders, watching the soft flicker of streetlights outside. For months, I'd lived under the same roof as a woman who plotted my downfall. It was a chilling thought but also a liberating one. Because now, she wasn't a threat anymore. She was exposed. David called the next morning. I heard the news, he said warmly. They caught her. Yes, I replied softly. Thanks to you, he chuckled. No, Mrs. Lane. Thanks to your instincts. You trusted them, even when no one else did. That's what saved you. As I hung up, I finally allowed myself to breathe deeply for the first time in months. But though she was behind bars, I knew the story wasn't over yet. Because soon, I'd have to face her again in court. Sitting in court, I finally saw the woman who'd smiled at me every day and nearly killed me. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and old wood polish. The low murmur of voices filled the hallway as people waited for their cases to be called. I sat on a hard wooden bench beside Aaron, clutching my purse tightly, my heart hammering in my chest. Across the room, Felicity sat between her lawyer and a uniformed officer, her wrists bound loosely in handcuffs. It was surreal seeing her like that. Her hair was neatly tied back, her expression calm, composed, almost cold. There was no trace of the charming, bubbly woman who used to fill my kitchen with laughter. Only a calculation remained. Aaron hadn't said a word since we walked in. He couldn't look at her. I couldn't blame him. He'd loved her once, trusted her, believed every lie she'd ever told. And now, here she was, accused of attempted manslaughter and fraud. The judge entered, and everyone rose. The proceedings began. The prosecution presented the case carefully, piece by piece. David's detailed pharmacy reports, the lab tests proving the pills had been swapped, the sealed bottle evidence, and most damning of all, the hidden camera footage. When the video played on the courtroom screen, a collective murmur swept through the audience. Even Felicity's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. There she was, caught in crystal-clear detail, sneaking into my room, replacing pills, tampering with the bottle like a seasoned criminal. I watched her face as the footage rolled. No shame. No remorse. Just that same detached expression, as if she were watching someone else. The prosecutor turned to the judge. Your Honor, these actions were deliberate, repeated, and premeditated. Mrs. Lane trusted her daughter-in-law to care for her. Instead, she was betrayed in one of the most intimate, insidious ways possible. Felicity's attorney tried to counter. My client was under immense emotional distress. She'd recently lost her job and suffered from depression. Her actions were not malicious, they were the result of an unstable mental state and confusion regarding her mother-in-law's prescriptions. I felt my stomach twist. Confusion? Depression? Those words were meant to soften her crimes, to paint her as the victim. Then, it was my turn to take the stand. The bailiff swore me in, and I sat down, my palms damp with sweat. The courtroom felt colder suddenly, every eye fixed on me. The prosecutor smiled gently. Mrs. Lane, could you please tell the court what you experienced? I took a deep breath. It started small, I said quietly. My pills looked different. I felt dizzy, weak. I thought maybe the pharmacy had changed suppliers, but something didn't sit right. My daughter-in-law had been offering to pick up my prescriptions and organize my medication. I trusted her completely. My voice wavered as I continued. But when I confronted her, she dismissed me. I began feeling worse, so I went to the pharmacist myself. That's when I found out the pills had been switched. It could have killed me. The courtroom was silent. I went on. I didn't want to believe it at first. She was family. But the pharmacist, David, helped me uncover what was happening. He suggested we document everything. We caught her on camera. The prosecutor nodded. You were once a nurse, correct? Yes, I replied. For 30 years. So, you knew the risks of the wrong medication. I did, I said softly. Which is why I know exactly how deliberate this was. She didn't make a mistake, she planned it. When the defense took their turn, Felicity's lawyer asked, Mrs. Lane, did you ever have disagreements with my client? Perhaps tension that could have caused misunderstandings? I met his gaze steadily. Every family has disagreements, but I don't think tension explains someone trying to poison you. A few people in the courtroom gasped quietly. He cleared his throat. And are you certain your medical condition wasn't exaggerating your reactions? Sometimes, I cut him off. I know the difference between dizziness from anxiety and symptoms from wrong medication. I was a nurse for decades. I know what I felt. I know what she did. When I stepped down from the stand, Aaron gave my hand a gentle squeeze. He was pale, but there was fire in his eyes now. When it was his turn to testify, his voice cracked several times. I loved her, he said quietly. I believed her, and she used that against both of us. My mother nearly died because of her. The judge listened intently as the prosecution wrapped up their closing argument. This case isn't about confusion or depression, the prosecutor said firmly. It's about greed and manipulation. Felicity Lane wanted control over her mother-in-law's life, her finances, and her future. When the judge called for recess, I could finally exhale. The tension had been unbearable. Aaron and I stepped outside for air. He leaned against the courthouse wall, staring at the pavement. It's so strange, he murmured. I used to wake up next to her every morning, and now I feel like I never knew her at all. I placed a hand on his arm. You didn't know this version of her. None of us did. The verdict came the next day. The jury filed in after hours of deliberation. Foreman stood, holding the paper that would decide everything. When he read the words, I felt the world slow around me. On the charge of attempted manslaughter, guilty. On the charge of fraud, guilty. A wave of emotion swept through me: relief, sadness, justice, grief. Felicity's expression didn't change. Not a tear, not a tremble. She only looked at Aaron once, her gaze cold, empty. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison. She was led away in handcuffs, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The sound echoed in my mind long after she disappeared through the door. Aaron sank into his seat, covering his face with his hands. I reached over and held his arm gently. It's over, I whispered. But as I looked toward the empty space where Felicity had been sitting, I realized it wasn't truly over, not yet. Because you can forgive a wound, but you never stop feeling the scar it leaves behind. Justice was served, but the wound of betrayal took longer to heal. When the gavel came down that day, a heavy silence followed. The kind of silence that carries relief and sorrow in equal measure. The courtroom emptied quickly, but I sat there for a long time, staring at the wooden bench where Felicity had been moments earlier. It was finally over, or at least, the part everyone could see was. Aaron and I walked out into the afternoon sunlight together, both of us exhausted. He hadn't said much since the verdict. His expression was distant, pained. I could tell he was struggling to reconcile the woman he'd loved with the criminal who'd just been sentenced. At home, the house felt both familiar and foreign. Every room still carried traces of her perfume lingering faintly in the hallway, her coffee mug on the counter, a scarf left hanging by the door. I wanted to throw everything out, but I couldn't bring myself to. Not yet. The memories were too tangled up with the lies. For weeks, I couldn't sleep properly. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced I'd heard footsteps in the hallway. Sometimes I'd check the locks twice before bed, just to make sure the house was safe. Rationally, I knew she was behind bars, but emotionally, she still haunted the place. Aaron started going to therapy, something the detective had gently suggested. He insisted I come with him a few times, saying it might help us both. I resisted at first. I'd spent my entire life taking care of others, not sitting on couches talking about my feelings. But after everything that happened, I realized healing wasn't weakness. It was survival. The therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Moore, listened patiently as I described the months of deceit and the fear that still clung to me. What Felicity did wasn't just physical harm, she said softly. It was psychological warfare. She took your trust, something sacred, and used it as a weapon. That line stayed with me. Because it was true. The bruises on the inside don't fade as easily as the ones you can see. David, the pharmacist, continued checking in on me every week. Sometimes he'd call, sometimes he'd stop by with fresh flowers or groceries. At first I thought it was just kindness, part of his sense of duty. But over time, I realized he genuinely cared. One afternoon he visited to help me organize my new medication setup, everything labeled, sealed, and stored securely. "You're one of the most resilient women I've met," he said as he double-checked the bottles. I smiled faintly. "Resilient? Or just stubborn?" He chuckled. "Maybe both. But either way, you're standing. And that matters." Those words brought me more comfort than I expected. Slowly, I started reclaiming my life. I began volunteering again at the local senior center, ironically, teaching a class on medication safety. At first, the irony was bitter. But when I shared my story with a small group of older women one afternoon, I realized it was turning into something else. One woman, her hair snow-white and her hands trembling, said softly, "My daughter's been managing my prescriptions too. And lately I've been wondering if something's off." Her eyes met mine, full of fear. That's when I knew my experience could protect others. I helped her make a plan. The same way David had helped me, verifying her pharmacy records, setting up tamper-proof storage, documenting every refill. When she thanked me later, I felt something loosen inside me. Purpose. That's what healing was. It wasn't forgetting. It was finding meaning in the pain. Aaron was healing too, though in his own way. He moved out for a while, taking a small apartment across town. "I just need space, Mom," he'd said one night over dinner. "Everything in this house reminds me of her." I understood completely. Sometimes the walls held too many echoes to bear. We still saw each other often. He'd stop by on weekends to mow the lawn or fix something around the house. Each time, he seemed lighter, steadier. The sadness was still there, but it no longer swallowed him whole. Months passed, and though Felicity's name still came up occasionally in conversation, it carried less weight each time. The anger dulled into acceptance. One spring morning, while watering the flowers in my garden, I caught myself humming a tune I hadn't sung in years. It felt strange at first, but then, it felt good. The sunlight was warm on my face, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore. That evening, Aaron came by with takeout, and as we sat eating on the porch, he said quietly, "I'm proud of you, Mom. You could have fallen apart after everything. But you didn't." I smiled at him, tears blurring my vision. "I had to stay strong for both of us." He nodded. "Still. You're incredible." The wind rustled softly through the trees. It was one of those perfect evenings, peaceful, quiet, almost healing in its simplicity. I remember thinking, maybe this is what closure feels like. But just as the weight of the past began to lift, life had one more reminder that healing isn't linear, that sometimes the ghosts of betrayal find their way back, even when you think they're gone for good. A few days later, when I checked my mail, I found a letter addressed in familiar handwriting. The sight of it froze me where I stood. My hands trembled as I turned it over, seeing the return address printed neatly in the top corner. State Correctional Facility. Felicity. The justice system had dealt with her, but she wasn't finished with me yet. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. The afternoon sun filtered weakly through my kitchen window as I stood there, holding that letter in my shaking hands. My first instinct was to tear it in half and throw it straight into the trash. I didn't want her words, her excuses, or her voice invading my peace again. But curiosity is a stubborn thing, and so is pain. After everything she'd done, part of me still needed to understand why. I set the envelope on the table and just stared at it. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, neat, precise, careful. Even the way she wrote my name looked like an act of control. Beatrice Lane, perfectly centered, like she was addressing me for a business matter instead of a near murder. After several minutes, I finally grabbed a knife from the drawer and slit the top open. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded neatly into thirds. I unfolded it slowly, my breath catching as I began to read. Dear Beatrice, I know you probably hate me. I don't blame you. I've had a lot of time to think here, and I realize what I did was wrong, horribly wrong. But please believe me when I say I never meant to hurt you. I wasn't trying to kill you. I was desperate and scared. Things were falling apart with Aaron. I thought if I could take over some of your responsibilities, maybe it would help us both. Maybe he'd finally see I could handle things, that I was strong enough to be trusted. I made a terrible mistake. I let jealousy and fear control me. I thought you saw me as weak, as a burden, as someone who would never live up to your standards. I wanted to prove you wrong. But I see now that all I did was destroy everything. I stopped reading for a moment, my throat tight. Her words were manipulative even now, half confession, half self-pity. Every sentence twisted the knife in a new way. She was still making herself the victim. I forced myself to continue. I know an apology can't undo what I've done, but I hope someday you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. I've been attending therapy sessions in here. They say I have control issues, and I think they're right. I tried to control everything around me because I couldn't control myself. Please tell Aaron I still love him. I never stopped. And please don't make him hate me forever. I wish I could see him, even for a minute, just to say goodbye properly. You don't have to write back, but I hope you will. Sincerely, Felicity. When I finished, I sat in silence. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from rage. Quiet, steady, almost freezing in its intensity. She called it a mistake. She called it desperation. As if poisoning someone and forging legal documents were minor lapses in judgment. I folded the letter carefully, set it on the table, and just sat there, staring at the wall. For a moment, I felt old, so very old. I thought about everything I'd lost because of her. My peace, my sense of safety, the bond with my son that had been tested to its breaking point. Then I thought about Aaron, how he still carried a trace of guilt, even though he wasn't the one who'd done this. I knew that if he saw this letter, it would reopen wounds that were finally starting to close. I couldn't let that happen. That night, I built a small fire in the backyard. The air was crisp, and the faint smell of smoke curled through the garden. I stood there for a long time, holding the letter between my fingers. I read it one last time in the flickering light. Her words looked smaller now, less powerful than they'd felt earlier. Just ink on paper from a woman who had already lost everything. I forgive you. I whispered, not for her, but for myself. But I'll never forget. Then I tossed the paper into the fire. The edges curled instantly, turning black, and within seconds the words were gone. Replaced by ash. I watched until the last ember went out. When I walked back into the house, I felt lighter. Not free, not completely, but lighter. The burden of her existence, her lies, her manipulation, it all seemed to lose its grip on me. Over the next few weeks, I didn't mention the letter to Aaron. I didn't need to. He was finally smiling again. Spending more time at work, reconnecting with friends. Sometimes I caught him looking at me with a hint of sadness, as if he still blamed himself. But I always reassured him, "You didn't fail me, Aaron. You helped save me." One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from the porch, he asked, quietly, "Do you ever think about her?" I hesitated before answering. "Sometimes, but not in the way I used to." He nodded slowly. "I don't know if I could ever forgive her." "That's okay," I said softly. "You don't have to. Forgiveness isn't for her, it's for us. So we can move on." That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. No nightmares, no restless pacing, no imaginary footsteps echoing down the hallway. When I woke the next morning, I brewed my tea just the way I liked it, and took my medication without fear. The pills gleamed softly in the light, untouched, genuine, safe. I looked out the kitchen window at the garden, the one place that had remained constant through it all. The flowers swayed gently in the wind, oblivious to everything that had happened. For the first time, I smiled, not a forced one, but real. Because in that moment, I realized Felicity no longer held any power over me. Not her lies, not her words, not even her apology could touch me anymore. She was finally where she belonged, behind bars, and out of my life forever. David stopped by one afternoon, carrying a small bouquet of daisies. It had been several months since the trial. The seasons had changed, and so had I. The air around me no longer felt heavy. My days no longer began with fear. Life had settled into a quiet rhythm again: morning tea, tending to my garden, volunteering at the senior center. It was peaceful, though a little lonely at times. I was pruning the rose bushes in the front yard when I heard the familiar sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I turned, squinting in the sunlight, and there he was, David, standing beside his car, holding a small bouquet of daisies wrapped in brown paper. "Thought I'd check on my favorite patient," he said with a warm smile as he approached. I laughed softly. "David, I haven't been your patient for months." He shrugged. "Old habits die hard. And besides, I figured, these might brighten your day." He handed me the flowers and I inhaled their gentle scent. "They're lovely," I said. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he replied simply. We sat on the porch together, the late afternoon sun casting long golden streaks across the lawn. For a while, we just talked about small things at first. The garden, the weather, his latest hiking trip. It felt good to have company, especially from someone who had seen me at my weakest and helped me through it. After a few minutes, he grew quiet, his gaze softening. "You look different, Beatrice. Happier, lighter." I smiled faintly. "I feel lighter. It took time, but I think I've finally made peace with everything." He nodded, setting his coffee cup down. "I still think about that case sometimes. It's not something you forget easily." "No," I agreed, staring at the flowers in the vase on the table. "But I've learned not to let it define me." David leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You know, when I first realized what was happening with your prescriptions, I couldn't believe it. I've seen errors, sure, but deliberate tampering? And by family? That was a first." I looked down, my voice soft. "It still doesn't feel real some days. To think she lived under my roof, smiling at me, waiting for the right moment to strike." He nodded thoughtfully. "Evil doesn't always look like we expect it to. Sometimes it wears a pleasant face." That truth lingered in the air for a moment. Then I turned to him with a small, genuine smile. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that kindness can be just as powerful as cruelty. You reminded me of that." David smiled back, his eyes warm. "You give me too much credit. You were the one who trusted your instincts. You were brave enough to stand up for yourself. I couldn't have done it without your help," I said firmly. "You believed me when no one else did. That means more than you'll ever know." He looked a little embarrassed at that, glancing down before saying, "Well, I'm just glad you're safe." We sat in comfortable silence for a while after that, listening to the soft hum of cicadas in the trees. The world felt calm again, stable. I hadn't realized how much I missed moments like this, where nothing was expected of me except to exist. After a few minutes, David chuckled lightly. "You know, the pharmacy started using new safety measures because of your case. Sealed digital verification, new packaging, even customer education workshops. You helped us change things, Beatrice." I laughed softly. "So, I'm a case study now?" He grinned. "The most famous one in town." The thought made me smile, part pride, part disbelief. To think that my nightmare had sparked something good, something protective for others, was strangely comforting. As the conversation flowed, the heaviness that had once surrounded my story faded into something gentler. We talked about my volunteering, his work, and even plans for the upcoming holidays. For the first time, I wasn't speaking as a victim. I was just me again. At one point, David stood up and looked toward my garden. "You've done a beautiful job here, he said. Everything's thriving. I followed his gaze. It took some work. I almost gave up on it after everything. But then I realized, it's a lot like life, you can't stop tending to it just because the storms came through. He smiled. That's a good way to put it. We moved to the garden path, and he helped me stake a few taller plants that had started to lean. It was quiet, but the kind of quiet that felt safe, earned. When we were done, we stood side by side, admiring the blooms. You know, I said softly, I spent so long being afraid to trust people again. I kept everyone at arm's length after the trial. But you? I looked at him and smiled. You reminded me that not everyone has an agenda. David's expression softened. You've got a good heart, Beatrice. It's why you survived this. You still believe in people, even after all that. I felt tears sting my eyes but blinked them away. Maybe that's my flaw. Or your strength, he countered gently. The conversation drifted again, light and easy. When it was time for him to leave, he hesitated by his car. You know, I'll be around next week, he said. If you ever need anything or just want to grab coffee, call me. I smiled. I might just take you up on that. As his car pulled away, I stood on the porch, watching the taillights disappear down the street. The daisies sat on the table beside me, their petals catching the last rays of sunlight. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt something that had eluded me for far too long: hope. I went inside, locking the door out of habit, but not out of fear. I brewed myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and let the warmth of the moment sink in. Because sometimes, healing doesn't come in grand gestures or courtroom victories. It arrives quietly, in small acts of kindness, and in the simple reminder that life still holds goodness after the storm. I never thought betrayal could hide behind such a familiar smile. In the months that followed David's visit, life began to feel whole again, slowly but surely. The sun seemed warmer, the mornings quieter, the world softer somehow. There were still moments, of course, when shadows of the past crept in uninvited. Some nights, I'd wake suddenly, half expecting to hear footsteps in the hallway again. But when I'd open my eyes and see only the gentle glow of my bedside lamp, I'd remind myself, it's over. She's gone. I learned something about fear during all of this. It doesn't vanish when the danger passes. It lingers, watching, testing you, waiting to see if you'll crumble again. But each time I refused to break, I reclaimed another small piece of myself. I started writing again, not letters, not reports, but small reflections in a journal David had given me. He said writing helped him process life when it felt too heavy. So I wrote about the betrayal, the court case, the strange loneliness that followed, and the quiet beauty of learning to trust again. My handwriting trembled at first, uncertain, like my heart. But with each entry, the words flowed steadier, bolder, freer. I wrote about Aaron too, how strong he'd become. He'd sold the house he once shared with Felicity and bought a small place nearby. He came by often, bringing groceries or helping fix things around the house. But more than that, he came just to sit with me, to talk, to share pieces of himself again. There was still pain in his eyes sometimes, but it no longer controlled him. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset on the porch, he turned to me and said, "You know, Mom, sometimes I still wonder if I could have stopped it earlier. If I'd just listened." I reached for his hand. "You can't keep punishing yourself for her choices," I said gently. "You saw what she wanted you to see. She fooled both of us." He nodded slowly. "I guess I just never thought I'd fall in love with someone capable of that." "None of us do," I replied. "That's what makes people like her so dangerous. They know how to hide behind charm and kindness until you forget to look closer." He smiled faintly. "You always told me to trust my instincts. I guess you should have told me to trust yours instead." I laughed softly, squeezing his hand. "I think we've both learned to listen a little better now." As the days passed, the heaviness that had hung over our family began to lift. We celebrated small things again: his new job promotion, my birthday, even the first blooms in my garden that spring. Every moment felt like a quiet victory, proof that life can grow back from even the darkest soil. Volunteering at the senior center became a bigger part of my life. I started teaching a new class called Safe Living for Seniors. We talked about everything from managing finances to recognizing manipulation to making sure no one ever felt pressured to give up control of their own lives. During one session, a woman named Ruth approached me afterward, her voice trembling. "My son's girlfriend has been taking over my medications," she confessed. "And lately, I've been feeling strange after taking them." Her words sent a chill through me. I recognized that same tone of fear I'd once carried. I took her hand and said, "You're not alone. I'll help you, step by step." Helping Ruth reminded me why I'd survived not just to heal, but to protect others from the same darkness. One afternoon, David stopped by again with a small box of pastries and that same easy smile. We sat in the garden, surrounded by daisies and lavender, the air thick with the scent of spring. "You've turned this place into paradise," he said, glancing around. "It's my therapy," I replied with a grin. "Cheaper than counseling and prettier than pills," he chuckled. "You've always had a way with words, Beatrice." As we talked, I realized something had changed between us, not in a grand, romantic way, but in the quiet familiarity of two people who'd been through fire together and came out stronger. There was comfort in that, something stable, something real. When he left that day, I stood by the fence, watching his car disappear down the road, and for the first time in years, I felt no fear about the future, just peace. That night, I sat by my window, looking out at the moonlit garden. The same garden Felicity once walked through, pretending to be part of the family she nearly destroyed. But instead of bitterness, I felt gratitude. Gratitude that I'd survived, that the truth had come to light, that I'd found my strength again. I picked up my journal and began to write my final entry about the ordeal, what I'd learned, what I'd lost, and what I'd gained. I learned that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers through gentle voices and polite smiles. But I also learned that courage isn't loud, it's quiet, patient, and persistent. It's waking up each morning and choosing to live without fear. I learned that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt but only with those who earn it, not those who demand it. I learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means remembering without letting the memory own you. And most of all, I learned that even in the darkest moments, good people still exist. You just have to keep your heart open long enough to find them. When I closed the journal, I felt a deep calm settle over me. The kind that doesn't come from winning or surviving but from finally understanding. I turned off the light and looked out the window one last time before bed. The stars shimmered faintly above the garden, and the daisies David had brought swayed gently in the night breeze. And though I'll always remember what happened, I refuse to let it define the rest of my life because survival isn't the end of the story. Healing is.